Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, we're going to create a faux live leaf. Now let me explain. In a previous video, we stitched onto a live leaf. Now the process is beautiful and very intriguing. It's quite unusual to have something nature-made and then enhanced by a man-made element. But sometimes those natural leaves, well, they age, they turn brown, and they start to decay. And so for the immediate art, it's a beautiful process and result. And sometimes, depending on the leaf, the dried leaf itself is also beautiful, but it is fragile. And there'll be times when you want that same effect, but with something that is a little more durable, something that you could put in your work, maybe add to a quilt or add to a pin backing and have a piece of jewelry. Today's technique uses fabric, and I have some other little tips to recreate a lifelike leaf appearance. So let's get started. So here we have the actual live leaves that we've stitched on. And as you can see, they're quite beautiful. This one is a few months old, so it's dried, and I still keep it pressed flat in a book. As you can see how nice and flat that is. It's very delicate. It's almost like paper. Depending on the variety of the leaf, though, they'll lose their green and turn brown, or in this case, this is just as old as this in terms of when it was picked, different variety of leaf, and it still maintain a lot of that green. It's quite beautiful. These two leaves are the same variety from the same plant, but different age. So this is only about a week old. And as you can see, it's starting to brown everywhere. And the areas where I actually pricked it to make my stitches are decaying at a faster rate. They're browning there. So that's one of the reasons why I look for alternatives. I enjoy the process of stitching on live leaves, and I do think it's beautiful, but the decay isn't always the look that I'm going for. So I came up with a few alternatives on how to make them so that they're on not live leaves. And in this case, the first alternative I'll show you in today's lesson is just using fabric. Now there's a few ways to prep your fabric, and there's a few processes that we'll go through to create these faux leaves. So the first thing that I do is I choose my fabric. Now I chose a solid here, and I tried to make it very similar to the color of a real leaf. So I chose greens, but you can always go a little off the norm here, and this is kind of a bluish pattern. What I'm looking for is that whatever pattern that I have on my fabric doesn't really compete with the background. But if you want that, if you want something really abstract, go right ahead and use it. I'm just going to choose some of this dark green fabric that we have here, but any of these would work nicely. So now the key to making this leaf resemble a leaf are twofold. One, we'll use this little interfacing on the back. It's just some tearaway interfacing for when we do our stitches, and that reinforces the fabric so that it doesn't fray. But the other key that I find that's really crucial in creating that realistic leaf is just some starch spray. Now, if you haven't used starch before, it's very easy. You can find it in the laundry aisle of your grocery store. This one comes in a spray. I think there might be other methods, but the spray for me is very easy. So it just requires a little shaking ahead of time. Then I take the can, hold it at an angle, and I just lightly spray. And I spray both sides of my fabric. And as you can see, it kind of foams up a little. Now I really need it to penetrate that fabric. I don't want it to be sitting on that fabric. So I'll just brush it in with my finger. I know I'm not going to use these edges, but if I was preparing a larger sheet of fabric, I'd really make sure that my starch went everywhere. Once I am certain that it's absorbed into the fabric, I'll just take a hot iron for the fabric and just press it down. And I'm trying to just dry the starch and get that fabric nice and dry. And depending on the starch you use, whether you use a light finish starch or a stiff, that will determine the stiffness of the fabric ultimately. So if you want a really stiff leaf and you don't have starch on hand and you're going to buy it for this purpose, then get a stiff starch. I use a light finish starch because this is what I use when I'm ironing my clothing as well. I don't really want a stiff starch. So now if you have too much starch, you'll get this little flaking on your fabric, and it's not a big deal. You can just wipe it away. I just like to go over my piece a few times, and as you can see, the color change back to normal. And now my fabric is a little warm, but it's much stiffer. The way I can hold it up, I can tell, and it feels a little stiffer. It doesn't really look much different, except that it's now perfectly pressed, and then I'll just brush away any of those flakes. And then we'll start embroidering our leaf. So now the beauty of working with a leaf is you can dictate the shape. You can make it a maple leaf or a heart-shaped leaf, just a standard leaf shape, really anything that you want. I like to add the little tail made out of fabric, but of course you can always sew in additional fabric, put a wire or even a piece of ribbon. It's up to you. To make my leaf shape, I just do a simple shape. I think the simple ones are a little more intriguing. So I'm just going to make essentially an oval, but the sides are going to be pointy. And that to me is just a basic leaf shape. You can always cut this with pinking shears if you wanted, and you can get as elaborate as you like. So I just kind of sketch out my little oval, and because it's a natural shape, it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. If you would like it to be, go right ahead, and I can decide exactly what shape I want for that leaf ultimately. Once I have that sketched out, I'll just cut it out using my fabric scissors. And it cuts beautifully. This is just a cotton fabric, but that starch really gives it just a little bit of body. And to me, that makes all the difference. That's what makes it look similar enough to a real leaf, that it doesn't just look like a piece of fabric cut into a leaf shape. So there I have my leaf. I made a little straight edge there, so I just want to trim that down ever so slightly, just to look a little more natural. And there I have my leaf shape. So now from here, this is where I get the fun part of deciding what I want to embroider on the leaf. If I wanted to make it realistic, I could just sketch out the veins and just embroider the veins, and that's very simple, and it's quite beautiful as well. You can stitch words just like we did on our live leaf, and that's another option that you have. Or you could stitch a little scene. You could do a little landscape or anything that you like for your embroidery. If you're drawn to creating a series of French knots, do that. You can embroider anything that you like, and that makes for a very interesting piece. Here I've done some veining, and then I added some French knots. You could even stitch a little ladybug on your leaf if you'd like. Here I just stitched something a little abstract, just a flowing line in pretty colors. And here I did a little take on the veining, but not quite, just something a little interesting. It adds texture, and it's really a pop of color here. So now to sketch out my design here, I think I'm just going to sketch out a few little flowers. So I'll just make a few little stems, just like that. And I'll put the center of the flower here, and then just a few little stems of the flower. Now the reason I like to do my sketch ahead of time is because then I can take my interfacing, cut out my sheet, and know exactly what size I need for the backing of this leaf. Because I'm not going to embroider anything up top here, I don't need to have that much interfacing on the leaf. Really, I just need to stick to the interfacing to this section. So again, I'll take my marker and just kind of sketch the rough shape of what I need for my interfacing, and I just only need it to go up that high. I cut within my lines because I don't need a full amount of this interfacing, and then I can just cut around here. Now this cuts very easily, this tearaway interfacing, and then I can just see if it fits on the back of my piece. It's a little big over here, so I'll just trim that down. And now it fits nicely. So now to hold it in place, I don't want to use a pin because I just don't want to poke the fabric additionally in spots where I don't need it. So I'm just going to take a little bit of tape and just place it down on the backing, and I'll remove that tape later. I can even put a little tape on the bottom here. And that just holds it in place for my initial stitches. So my next thing is to start my stitching. I'm going to take some of this light green thread. I chose these colors because they stand out on that fabric. And I'll just start at the bottom here of that center stem. And I'm just going to use a stem stitch, and I'm going to stitch the length of the stem. Because it's a straight stitch and I'm just going straight up and down, I can make the stitches fairly large. I make that loop, I come back in the center of that loop, and I just continue all the way up to the top of that stem. And because I'm going in between the stitches, there's no gap. It just makes a very interesting connected line. I'll go right up to where I want the top of that flower to be. And so there I have a little stem stitch. I also know that I want little leaves at the base, so I'll just stitch a leaf shape here, and I'll do that on either side. And I can make this as elaborate as I want. So now I want to stitch the stem over here. I'll start at the base. Because this stem is not perfectly straight, I'll just follow that line, again using that stem stitch. I'm stitching right through that terrible interfacing on the back, as well as my fabric. This is just a very basic design. You can use any design that you like. Pull my stitches together, and again I'll come back in the bottom and make little leaves. Just on a little angle going in to the base of that stem. And I'll do one more on here on the right hand side. I'll start at the base, create that stem just on a slight angle. Then I'll make my little leaves. And then I'll knot my thread on the back. So now at this point, I'll take my tape off my bottom piece because it was getting in my way. I'll leave the tape up top just so that I don't fold over that interfacing while I'm stitching. And now I can start the center of my flowers. I'm going to use some nice yellow thread, and again I like that contrast, but you can use whatever color you like. I'm going to start here on the left hand side, just going to go a little bit above where we created the top of that stem, and I want to make a French knot. So I'm going to pull my thread, wrap it around my needle 3 times, maybe 4 times, and then still maintain that thread and the tension in my hand here, or my left hand. I'm going to gently pull my needle and, still maintaining that tension on the thread on my left hand, insert the needle back into my fabric. Using my thumb here, holding this thread in place and gently pulling all that thread through that knot. And there I have a little beautiful French knot. I'm going to move over here and do that same procedure for that second center of the flower. Take my needle, wrap the thread around 4 times. It gives a nice big center knot. Maintain that tension on that thread. Insert it right next to that place where we started the knot. Again, holding that thread in place, pulling the thread down, and creating that little knot. And now I'll do one more over here, again using that same procedure. Insert the needle, wrap that thread around as many times as I want, maintain that tension, reinsert that needle and gently pull that loop through. And there I have 3 French knots on my leaf. I'll knot off on the back here, and we can start sewing little petals. Now, just to finish off the petals, I just chose some light little purple here. So I'll start with this little knot here on the end, and I'm going to start right over here at kind of the 3 o'clock. I'm just going to stick my needle in and make just a little seed stitch here, just a little straight stitch. And then I'll come over here, the 12 o'clock. And again, I'm trying to maintain the stitch length approximately the same. And I'll do the same thing over here at the 9 and then the 6. Now there's not a lot of room over here at the 9, so I'll make my stitch a little smaller. And now I just want to insert some stitches in between those places. And this helps me to space it evenly. I can change the color of the thread if I wanted, alternating it, maybe add a white or a deeper shade of purple. And I just have a pretty little sweet flower. And now I'll continue to do this on the other 2 flowers, and I'll show you what it looks like. So there, I finished stitching all around those little flowers. I can turn around here, remove that tape, and now I have my completed leaf. And it looks so pretty, these cute little flowers. So that's another way to make that leaf. I'll take an iron and press out that fabric marker that I used. But that's my completed fake leaf using one method. I still have 2 more methods to show you in future videos. So this is my little set of fake leaves using fabric and just some pretty embroidery stitches. You can leave the interfacing here if you want, or you can remove it by just gently cutting around or tearing it away. And that's the beauty in that product. It also gives it a little stability, so I tend to leave them on my pieces unless I need to take them off. So that's how I make the first of my 3 faux leaves. I hope you found this video helpful. Have you made these leaves before, or are you going to give it a try? Say so in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me.